Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Tony Whitbeck. I'm the CEO of Key Management Group. And with me today is Kathy Sweet, and she's our practice protection consultant. For those of you who are at Ameriprise, you may recognize her name. She was formerly the head of the risk mitigation department at the corporate office. Also with me today is Shana Anderson. She's our chief strategist and financial analyst on this project. And the two of them are going to participate with some of the content as we get into today's presentation. You'll see that this presentation is titled What You Must Know About Your AFA Arrangements. And I think what you're going to find here is that there's a lot of things that can go wrong and may be currently going wrong within your practice. And the whole purpose of this is to make you aware of the right way to do things and to help you understand the economics about when hiring an AFA and the different ways that you can bring them on and what does it mean in terms of profitability. So I'm confident you guys will find this presentation valuable today. So what we're going to talk about today is, first of all, the typical evolution of a practice. Secondly is, when does it make sense to bring on an AFA? Third is considerations that you might take into consideration when hiring an AFA. And then lastly, we'll be covering our service, which is our AFA analysis. And we're going to talk about how we help design the compensation structure, as well as analyzing the risk associated with bringing on an AFA. So let's first start talking about the evolution of a practice. So practices normally start as a sole practitioner, and that practitioner does everything from making the coffee, answering the calls, doing the financial planning, the trades, the case prep, and everything else. Well, as they develop, typically they will hire some support staff or team members. And oftentimes those team members will receive work delegated to them in the area of client meeting prep, maybe filing or e-filing, if you will, financial plan production, and other things. Once they hire that support staff and they acquire a larger client base, they typically need some help in serving their clients. And so they generally then will move into more of a team practice approach where they will bring on an AFA to help service some of the clients. Then as practices get really big, they'll move into more of a complex situation where they have multiple team members and perhaps multiple AFAs and multiple staff members as well. So you go from a sole practitioner to a practice with staff to a team practice and to complex practices. And along the way, the complexity increases substantially. And when you're dealing with registered staff members like AFAs, there's a lot of things that can go wrong if you don't do it right. So when you look at a sole practitioner, you'll see that we define it as one advisor with no staff. On average, they manage about 36 million in AUM, and they produce about 215,000 of revenue or gross dealer concession. And we get these statistics from the valuations that we do. We do about 400 valuations every year, and this data came from the last 500 valuations that we've performed. The advisor with the support staff, you can see they're defined as one advisor and one team member, and the average assets under management here are 60 million, almost double the 36 million. And then the average gross dealer concession or revenue is almost 380,000. Almost doubling the 215,000 from a sole practitioner. Then we move into complex teams. You're going to see that we define this as 2.6 advisors and 2.3 team members. The average AUM is 144 million. The average GDC is 1.1 million, and then the average production per producer is 432,000. So you can see that the productivity does go up over time. I will tell you from some of the work that we do around valuations and practice management, it's hard to maintain some of those profit margins as you get bigger, which is contrary to what you might think. So ultimately, the services that we develop at Key Management Group is to help advisors maximize the profitability and effectiveness of their practice. So when you look at sole practitioners, the services that we offer that help them are our executive coaching program, our financial planning, outsourcing, our client meeting preparation, and our succession planning services, and I'd even include our business valuations there as well. So as an executive coach, we work one-on-one with the business owner to help them develop and grow and create strategies for their business. At the same time, since they're a sole practitioner, they may want to outsource financial planning or client meeting preparation. And it's important that every advisor has a succession plan in place to protect their practice value in the event of their death or disability. Now, to get to the next door of complexity, if you will, the advisor must learn how to delegate, manage time, and build systems. And so when you have an advisor that now has support, not only do we offer the same services to the solo practitioner, but now our practice management service comes into play. And this is where we help you manage the back office. We focus on things like roles and responsibilities, systems, processes, workflows, model weeks, those types of things, and to make sure that the proper things are being delegated and that nothing's slipping through the cracks. So to get to the next level of complexity, people need to learn how to manage people, optimize systems, maximize capacity, and really learn how to run a business. So in addition to the services I've already talked about, we can add our practice protection service, which is really a way to protect the practice, to make sure that all of your agreements are in place and they're not violating any regulatory, legal, or franchise rules or policies. And then we have our merger and acquisition services, because people are typically buying practices to get big in these team complex practices. Then we have our deal support service, where we help people negotiate and structure deals. So when you look at the productivity, back to the solo advisor, you'll see that on the low end, they're doing 143,000. And you move all the way up to the complex or team practices, you'll see that the top 20% or the 8th percentile, they're doing about 1.2 million in revenue. So along that curve comes complexity, and with complexity comes the potential danger that you could be doing some things wrong. So those are some of the services that we offer, and you can see how they fit into the career path as you build your business. Today, we're really going to focus on the managing people, optimizing systems, maximizing capacity, and running the business. So why do advisors consider hiring AFAs? Well, sometimes they'll hire an AFA to support an existing client base. Maybe the client base has gotten too large and they need more help. Another one is to allow for more work-life balance for the senior advisor. They don't want to see as many clients. The third might be a career path for a licensed individual. The fourth would be focus on growing the practice so they can impact just more lives, more clients. They may want to add through quantum growth by bringing on an AFA, and then they may want to really take their practice to the next level through recruiting experienced advisor recruits. Michael Kitces, who's a famous blogger and financial advisor, wrote, "While a solo financial advisor with a core team of staff support can grow an incredibly profitable personal practice, the reality is that at some point, the advisor's personal productivity just cannot be leveraged any further." In other words, what he's saying is the virtue of having a business partner is getting a smaller slice of a much bigger pie. So in this example, if someone's doing 500,000 and someone else is doing 300,000, and working together in a group practice, hopefully you can do 1.2 million or more than the 800,000 of combined revenue. What I'd like to do next is turn it over to Kathy, and Kathy is going to walk you through a few slides. And the first one is considerations for an AFA relationship. And Kathy, if you could give our audience a little bit of background, that would be great too.
Sure. As Tony mentioned, I was with Ameriprise for quite some time, the last 16 years. My organization both provided regulatory compliance supervision, but we also partnered with leaders, advisors, franchise consultants, with advisors as they were building their practices, making some of the decisions that Tony talked about. And what my organization did was to take a look at how the decisions you made would impact the level of risk in your organization. And over time, we came to the conclusion that there are a number of things that need to be considered. There's no correct order. But things to take into consideration for any time you add someone to your team. And I'm not going to go through all the chevrons, but some of the things I wanted to hit on is a business strategy. Tony talked about, the examples of moving through, but it's important that before you add a staff member that you know what your business strategy is and what kind of behavior you want to incent. Then, of course, a compensation system is important. But the real key to managing the risk is understanding the franchise rules, regulatory rules, and state laws and how they're going to impact the business, expose you to the possibility of a lawsuit from staff, a number of things. So you need to kind of have a plan to map all of these out. And then once you've nailed down the roles and responsibilities, making sure you have the right legal documentation, making sure that what your vision is compatible with home office systems. So these are some of the things to consider, and I'm going to move to the real key is you think about what could a bad breakup look like and plan accordingly. So those are the kind of sort of the major considerations. I think it's also important once you've got your vision and strategy is that you think about the sources of AFAs. And there are three main sources that you can pull from. One is a brand new AFA who doesn't have much experience, may be licensed, may or may not be licensed in serving clients. With that, you're going to have a lot of development time up front, but the complexity will be relatively low and the risk will be relatively low because they're coming new to the business, and you can introduce them and work through what it means to be a member of a franchise as they grow and develop on your team. When you bring in an existing advisor or AFA, they've already have clients. You're not going to have a lot of development time. Complexity, they understand what it means to be not just with a broker-dealer, but a franchise organization. And the risk is relatively medium. So there are things that they may bring to the table, but there also is some risk that because perhaps they were an advisor, they have expectations about how clients will be handled and what will happen with equity. So those are some of the things you need to consider. Finally, with experienced recruits, again, they bring a book of business. They can help you grow initially, come right out of the box. But the development, there will be getting them used to the Ameriprise system. The complexity can be very high because it's their book. They've worked at other firms, and coming in with an understanding of what a business model is. And again, bringing the franchise rules and regulations into that tends to make it more complex and therefore more risk. So part of the process as you're going through your business plan is the different considerations, the different pieces you'll have to have in place, and then how do you want to source them? One of the other things that I think is important is that you take the time to assess your own readiness. So as Tony talked about, there's levels of skills you need to attain as you move from solo to with a team member to complex. There are also things that as a business owner, you need to determine, again, what's your readiness? Do you have the right documentation? Do you understand what documentation is available? How do you want to put together a compensation plan? Look at what incentives you do want to drive, but then how do you put together a program that is both compliant with regulatory requirements, but also with Ameriprise policies and procedures? And then performance. Are you ready to manage situations if things do go wrong? If you have a poor performing AFA, whether they are an employee or an independent contractor, you need to think about what documentation do you need to have in place and what's your readiness to deliver that information and potentially terminate their relationship with you. Finally, what I wanted to touch on is, and this is kind of a relatively new concept for most advisors, is that for years Ameriprise have had sample documents and we did the Protecting Your Practice presentations. But one of the things we found over time is that when you put together your documentation, there are important provisions to have, including non-solicitation versus a non-compete. But the problem with those types of terms is they are limited state by state in terms of what protection you really will get. So one of the things we're recommending is that in your documentation, you put the right provisions in for what we're calling a practice prenup, where it's not standardized language as in most contracts, but as you're setting out and valuing your practice, looking at what the terms are, sitting down with a candidate, whether it's an experienced AFA or when you bring another advisor or partner with another advisor, to talk about the terms up front. What do we do with the clients? If things go wrong and you potentially do end up in a bad breakup, adding provisions to the actual documents up front that would determine how clients leaving or going with another advisor would be determined, and you'd set a formula for the pricing right up front. So again, that's an example of a number of the things that you can do before things go wrong as you get ready to bring an AFA into the practice. So Tony, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, thank you, Kathy. As luck would have it, during this presentation, I have a jackhammer outside my office right now, so hopefully you guys don't have to hear it. So how do we help advisors and AFAs? So one is through our executive coaching program, we can help you consider the impacts of an AFA to your business for your long-term growth strategy. Our practice management team can help develop the roles and responsibilities for all the team members, because some of your team members may be changing roles. Perhaps a paraplanner got promoted to be an AFA. You need to replace that paraplanner or the tasks that they're doing. Our case preparation and financial plan production outsourcing allows you to perhaps take the roles your paraplanner had that became an AFA and outsource them instead of hiring someone else, or to offload some of the work that you're currently doing so you can develop your AFA. And then finally, our succession planning services, in particular business valuation, allows you to really understand the equity or the value of your practice. And this is going to be important when you start allowing other advisors like AFAs to start serving your clients, because you want to know what the value of those clients are. So if they were to leave and try to take those, and you have a prenup in place, then you already have a formula that would determine what the value of those are. So you want to understand not only the equity in your practice, but what is the risk of the equity loss by allowing an AFA to service those. At the same time, you may want to be valuing an external book of business if you're bringing someone in as an AFA, as an experienced advisor recruit, because you're going to want to know, the AFA is going to want to know what that business is worth, because technically you as the employing advisor have the equity and not that AFA. And we'll talk on another one of our sessions around practice interest agreements and how those work. So specifically to today's service, which is our AFA analysis, our package includes two things. One is part one, which is the financials. And so you would work with Shana to come up with a couple of scenarios. It may be independent advisor or independent contractor versus employee, and different models where you may look at it on a salary basis or creating a payout grid. There may be bonuses involved. There may be employee benefits if they're an employee. And so Shana will work through all of the financials with you. And then you'll have an opportunity to meet with Kathy, and Kathy may meet with you on the first meeting with Shana as well. But Kathy will then offer an hour of her time discussing all the risks associated with what you're about to embark in. So those are the two parts of the package. And so what I'd like to do now is turn it over to Shana, and she's going to take us through a few slides, and then I'll wrap up with the process, the pricing, and how you go about purchasing the service. So Shana?
Thank you, Tony. So as Tony mentioned, when I'm at the point where I'm working with the advisor on their AFA decisions, we really are trying to help them know what offer to put on the table. And a lot of times advisors have some concept of how much payout they should be giving the AFA or what salary, or sometimes they start with what profit margin they would like to make. But there are a lot of variables and a million different ways that you can structure the deal. So it's very hard to know, is this a good deal for the advisor? Is it too good of a deal for the AFA, et cetera? So what we do is we have built a financial model that allows us to play with some of these variables in real time. We know that you have big decisions to make, so we would like to give you this tool and work through it with you so you can see what some of these decisions equate to in terms of numbers. I'll show you a little bit of the model in a bit. And a lot of times people say, oh, can you just send me the model? But this is quite a complex calculation, actually, and it's not something that is super user intuitive. Every situation has been unique so far. We've never found two cases that are the same. So each one requires a different model. And one of the things that we think we add value to is helping you hone in on the variables and coaching you through them. So what do we look at? First of all, we look at the type of AFA. Are you bringing in somebody who is maybe a paraplanner, used to getting paid a fixed salary with benefits, and now you're transitioning them to an AFA? If that's the case, then their mindset might be different than if you are recruiting over someone from another firm who has a book of business, who's very comfortable working for a payout grid because that's what they're used to. What is the role of the AFA going to be? Are you going to be handing them clients and saying, okay, these are the people I want you to meet with? Or are they going to be responsible for doing their own marketing and advertising and getting new clients in the door? What behavior you want to incentivize will dictate what kind of model we set up. Is it going to be an independent contractor or a W-2 employee? As many of you know, there's a big tax difference between there and who is paying the expenses and how much of the expenses they're paying depending on this decision. So to differentiate between what I do and what Kathy does, Kathy will also help you look at which is the correct classification strategically, and then I will help you run through and see financially what the difference is between those two scenarios. In some cases, there's a recruiting bonus. For experienced recruits coming over with a book of business, there is a bonus that might even come from home office based on the assets they're able to bring over. So that would factor into the model. How much GDC do we anticipate they'll be able to write once they're your AFA? Do you want two different payout grids? Do you want a payout grid for the clients that you've handed to them versus a payout grid for the clients that they are getting started with on their own? A lot of times, depending on what behavior you're trying to drive, you might want to pay them more for the clients that they're bringing in on their own and pay them less for the clients that they've been handed. So we can consider different payout grids as well. Also, financial planning incentives. Based on your own practice's goals, this might be very important. Maybe you're trying to drive up your financial planning numbers, and so you want to give them bonuses if they can get you more financial plans. So we would factor that into the equation. And then a lot of expenses as well. Who's paying rent? Are you paying acquisition costs? Are you buying them leads? Are you buying them clients? Who's paying for the paraplanners who support their work? Marketing, home office expenses, supervision, technology, etc. So we try to account for these. These are some high-level considerations that go into the model, but under each one of these, there's a number of bullet points as well. But just to give you an idea of what the financial model is, hopefully those let you know what we are thinking of when we're putting together the projections. So a lot of people want to see the model, and again, since it's so specific to each situation, it's hard to put a model up on the screen. But I do have some screenshots here of kind of the level of detail we're looking at when we set this up. So up on the screen, you can see we have estimated GDC in the first year for the AFA's clients. That would be their own book of business versus the practice clients. These are your clients that they are now servicing. You can also see we account for the expenses. How much are you paying for acquisition, rent, et cetera? Some of those things I covered. So we model those inputs to help us know what are they going to be generating? What are you going to have to pay? And that helps us design these outputs. And really what people need the most, that we find that where they're stuck and they're having trouble, is how to design the payout grids. And again, sometimes people have one payout grid, sometimes they end up with two different payout grids, sometimes they have a hybrid model where they start with a salary and then transition the person over to a grid once they're making enough GDC to support themselves. So our model is very flexible, but as I said, we'll model those inputs, and then this is a sample of the kind of output you would walk away with. Each one of these is a variable that will change based on your specific situation, but you'll basically have a grid, and it'll show what will the payout rate be at this grid, what will your expenses be if they're writing this much GDC, etc. So you'll have specific numbers. The other thing that we do with the financial modeling is that we realize, as the advisor, most of the time you're interested in profitability and what will bringing this person into my practice result in terms of money in my pocket. And you really want to focus on the profitability of this arrangement, because you don't want to just bring in another person and end up actually walking away with less money at the end of the day because you are supporting this person. And so we also know that a lot of times when you're talking to the AFA, you don't necessarily want to show them all of your cards and say, oh, here's how much money I'm making off of you if you do a good job. And so we realize that when we give you the model, we really structured it in two different ways. It's the same numbers, but they're formatted differently. One is a profitability analysis, which is advisor facing for you. So you can see, what is my income? What are my expenses? What do I walk away with? How profitable is this? And then we take the same numbers, shift them differently, and then format them for the AFA. So in those terms, it is, what can I expect to make? What bonuses would I be eligible for? What benefits am I receiving? How much is this package being put in front of me worth? So you'll get both numbers. I would say the most important part of the financial modeling that we do is really the 5-year projection, because we know that the first year is often very uncertain, and a lot of times advisors are taking a big risk when they're bringing on an AFA, particularly in cases where they're guaranteeing a salary. Maybe you're recruiting someone and you have to match the salary that they're currently making to recruit them in. And so if we just ran these models based on the first year numbers, a lot of times you don't see the whole picture. So this 5-year projection, what this does is it allows us to assume growth. You know, you bring them in the first year, maybe they didn't rate that much GDC because they were getting their bearing. Once they got established, then we're expecting 30% growth on the practice and 40% growth on their own book of business. We can model all of that out. And it's really important to look at the long-term benefit of this arrangement, so you can see that even if you take a loss in the first year, at what point will this become profitable and how profitable? And I believe that seeing this gives you a lot more confidence when you go in to negotiate your deal with the AFA. It gives you some goalposts to shoot for, because you know what the first year is going to look like, and also if the deal is good, what it will look like in the long run. So those are the things that we hope to arm you with when you walk away with the financial modeling that you do with us. Thank you, Tony.
Oh, great, Shana. Thank you for that. So Shana walked you through part 1, which is the financial modeling. And then part 2 is with Kathy. And Kathy's going to share with you just a few of the things that she'll discuss with you during your consultation with her. Kathy?
Thanks, Tony. Making these decisions really is an iterative process. And so, as Tony said, that when we start this process, Shana will send out a data gathering tool, and then we'll have a data gathering call, and Shana and I will do that call together and talk about some of the things you're thinking and make some preliminary guesstimates, if you will, and for how Shana should run the model. But after we have those conversations and Shana has started running the model, what I'll do is basically go back and look at all the information that you've provided me and come back to you with types of arrangements between the advisor, that what's legal, what's not legal. I'll look at how the franchise rules, the concept of equity and all of that impact what you are planning. And provide you with, we'd have a discussion where we talk about some of the options, what I would recommend to get the right protection integrated into your implementation and onboarding strategy, and then talk about what type of documentation do you need, and walk through what can go wrong and ensure that you're comfortable with it and understand what the protection steps you must take are.
Great, thank you, Kathy. So let me define the process in terms of purchasing our service. So you'll see the first step is to go online and make a purchase. You can do that on our website soon. One of our credit card processors is changing their process, and so I'll be able to send you a link after this presentation, but it's currently not set up on the website. You'll see that it's $9.95 for the service. It's going to include part one, the financial analysis, with up to 3 scenarios, typically 2 initially and then a final. And then it's going to include the consulting from Kathy around practice protection. So as Kathy mentioned, a data gathering questionnaire will go out to you after you make the purchase. And then you'll meet with both Kathy and Shayna. And then Shayna will start running the financial analysis portion. And then you'll ultimately pick the final scenario and that you'll be able to present to your AFA. There may be times that we refer you to some other professionals for attorneys, like attorneys for contracts and agreements, our practice management team if you need help with roles and responsibilities, and then our succession planning services around business evaluations, continuity planning, and those types of things. So really, who is this for? Well, it's for a number of different people, but clearly it's for advisors who either have or are anticipating bringing on an AFA into their practice. So it could be for advisors who are thinking of hiring an AFA. You want to fully understand the impact of that decision and what you'd be able to afford and be able to offer that individual. The second might be advisors that are committed to an AFA. So you have another person, maybe the two of you are looking at bringing on an AFA into a team practice, and you're just not sure how that's going to work. And then for advisors who already have an AFA, what I have found is that most advisors who have an AFA, when I ask how they determine the compensation, they say, I don't know, I just paid them what I thought was right. And then, well, how did you determine if they're independent contractor or employees? And well, I wanted to make them independent contractor because it's cheaper. And all those things can be problematic. And so if you have an AFA and you never really thought through the process and looked at all of the different aspects or variables that could come into play, this service is extremely valuable for you. So for an advisor who already has an AFA, we have another service that I'd like to suggest. It's called our Practice Protection Assessment. And you'll see this is a holistic review of the practice, which is a detailed risk assessment with a focus on how the equity and practice interests are established. In this case, Kathy will be doing this work, and she'll review all of the agreements that you currently have in place. Hopefully you have some agreements in place. So she'll review the entity agreements if you have it, practice interest agreements if you have it, the independent contractor employment agreement or independent contractor agreement or employment agreement. And then you'll get a written deliverable of all of the risks that she's assessed in the practice. And she's going to be looking at it from a regulatory, a legal, and from a franchise perspective. And so, again, if you already have a more complex practice and you're concerned about the risks, you might also want to consider a protection practice assessment. $18.95 is for one practitioner and AFA and team members. And then you can see for each additional advisor, it's an additional $500 or $300 for each additional AFA, because there's simply more documents that we need to review. So there's really 2 services I talked about. The AFA analysis, which is $9.95, and that's really around designing comp and understanding the risks. And then our practice protection assessment, which is designed for more complex practices that already have a lot of people in place and want to manage those risks. So what I'd like to do next is open it up to some Q&A. And there's 2 ways that you can ask a question, both of which are going to be on your GoToWebinar control panel. and you can either raise your hand, and I'm going to unmute your telephone line, and we can have a free conversation, or you can type in a question, and I'll read off the question, and we'll do our best to answer that question. So let me just pause for a minute and see if any of our viewers here have a question for us. While we're waiting, one of the things I would suggest you do is you go to our website at keymanagementgrp.com to learn more about our services. Following this webinar, I'll be sending out a link that would allow you to click on that link to purchase this service. And it looks like we don't have any questions, so that is good, I guess. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Hopefully you found this informative. You learned about the progression of a financial advisory practice. Then we talked about the risks associated with hiring an AFA, and then how you want to structure it so it's profitable to you and minimizes the risk to both you and the AFA. So hope we hear from you soon. Thanks again for coming, and we'll talk to you later.